King Obasi sat alone in his private chambers, his fingers lightly tracing the rim of a half-filled goblet. It was late, but sleep rarely came easy for the king. The palace was silent, yet his mind was loud. It had been 6 years. 6 years since he had been crowned. 6 years since the weight of the kingdom had settled onto his shoulders. He had ruled wisely, strengthened alliances, expanded trade, and ensured that no external threats dared test his kingdom. The people respected him. The council acknowledged his leadership, and yet, it was never enough. A king without a wife. A king without an heir. A king without a queen. It did not matter that he had brought stability. The whispers in the palace halls were growing. The elders had become more persistent, pushing for him to choose a bride. The people murmured about the need for lineage. They did not know how many nights he spent staring at the ceiling, wondering what would happen if they ever learned the truth. Would they still kneel before him? Would they still call him their king? Obasi took a slow sip of wine. The weight of duty was a crushing thing, but duty was the only thing keeping his secret buried. The throne room was vast, its towering stone pillars stretching toward a domed ceiling, adorned with gold and crimson banners. A long red carpet led from the grand entrance to the ornate throne at the far end, where King Obasi sat. The air was thick, not just with the scent of burning incense, but with unspoken tension. Before the king stood Elder Bahati, dressed in flowing white robes embroidered with gold, his aged but unshaken posture exuding authority. He had been an advisor long before Obasi took the throne, and now he stood as the voice of the royal council. "You are nearing 30, Your Majesty," Bahati began, his deep voice echoing in the vast hall. "The time has come." There it was again. Marriage. A queen. An heir. Obasi's expression did not change, but his fingers curled slightly against the armrest of his gold and ebony throne. How many times would they have this conversation? "And have I not ruled well without a queen?" His tone was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. Bahati gave a slow nod. "You have, but a kingdom is not ruled by wisdom alone. A king without a queen is vulnerable. A king without an heir is temporary." But Obasi knew one thing. This was not about love. It was about control. A married king was easier to bend, to mold, to trap. A queen would be the council's key to the throne, a silent, elegant form of power. Then Bahati's voice dropped, carrying a weight that was impossible to ignore. "Your Majesty, the people are talking. The nobles are watching. If you refuse to marry, the council may be forced to take matters into their own hands." A threat. Obasi's jaw tensed. Slowly, deliberately, Obasi rose to his feet. His voice was low, steady, dangerous. "Then I suppose," he said, "we are at a standstill." He turned, his cloak sweeping behind him as he strode toward the massive double doors, leaving Bahati standing alone beneath the towering pillars of the throne room. Tariq adjusted his cloak as the horse beneath him carried him closer to the palace gates. He had traveled for days, dust coating his boots, but he felt no exhaustion, only purpose. It had been years since he had last seen the palace, since he had last seen him, Obasi. The name felt foreign on his tongue now, though once it had been the only name that mattered. The wind carried the scent of the city, a mixture of spices, roasted meat, and distant rain. Everything felt the same, yet nothing was. Tariq was no longer the foolish boy who had once dreamed of love in hidden corridors. He had been cast out, exiled, left to carve his own fate beyond the kingdom's walls. He had built himself from the ground up, sharpened his mind, turned himself into a man who could not be ignored. And now, he was returning. Not as the boy who had once whispered promises in the night, but as a man ready to reclaim what was taken from him. The palace gates opened before him, but the guards did not step aside immediately. "Tariq," one of them murmured, eyes widening in recognition. Tariq smirked. "Still standing in my way after all these years?" The guard hesitated before stepping aside. Tariq passed through the gates, each step bringing back memories. He ignored them. His destination was clear. Inside, the palace had not changed. The scent of sandalwood lingered. The golden candlelight flickered against the stone walls. And yet, something felt heavier. The throne room doors loomed before him, and behind them, the man who had once meant everything to him. With a steady breath, Tariq pushed the doors open. The throne room was eerily silent when Tariq stepped inside, and there he was. King Obasi sat upon the high throne, dressed in red robes embroidered with golden accents. The crown rested lightly upon his head, but Tariq knew the weight it carried. He looked the same, and yet different. The years had hardened him. His shoulders were broader, his gaze more guarded, his expression unreadable. But those eyes, they were still the same. Obasi leaned forward slightly, fingers drumming on the armrest. Tariq. His name on Obasi's lips sent something sharp through him. Tariq kept his expression calm, his chin lifted as he took a few steps closer. "Your Majesty." Obasi studied him, his face betraying nothing. But Tariq saw it, the flicker of something behind those dark eyes. Memories. Obasi knew. He knew. But neither of them acknowledged it. Not yet. "What brings you back to the palace?" Obasi asked, his voice smooth, controlled. Tariq smirked. "Would you believe me if I said I missed the fine company?" The corner of Obasi's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. But just as quickly, his expression turned cold again. "You left in disgrace, Tariq, and now you return as what?" Tariq took another step forward, closing the distance between them ever so slightly. "An advisor, a man who understands this kingdom better than most." "And why should I trust you?" Obasi asked. Tariq tilted his head. "Because I am the only man in this room who knows you." A muscle in Obasi's jaw tightened. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him not as a king, but as a man. And he hated how much he missed it. Obasi dismissed the council after Tariq's arrival, but he remained in the throne room long after everyone had left. His fingers tapped lightly against his knee, his mind far from matters of the kingdom. Tariq. The name alone sent a slow ache through his chest. He had spent years burying those memories, convincing himself that what happened between them was just a reckless mistake of youth, a fantasy, a weakness. But seeing him again, standing there, still sharp-tongued, still fearless, Obasi felt something shift inside him. Damn him. Tariq had always been good at making him feel things he shouldn't. And worse, he still looked so good. His jaw was sharper, his confidence even more unshakable. And his eyes. Obasi ran a hand over his face, shaking his head. There was no space for this. Not now. And certainly not for him. Tariq walked through the palace halls, each step stirring up memories he had long tried to forget. Everything looked the same. The high ceilings, the intricate tapestries, the scent of burning sandalwood. And yet, the palace no longer felt like home. Not yet. As he turned a corner, he nearly collided with Elder Bahati. The older man stopped, eyes narrowing. "You?" Tariq smirked. "Me." "What business do you have here?" the elder sneered. "You have no place among us." Tariq leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Then why did the king let me in?" Bahati's face darkened. He took a step back, regaining his composure. "You may be back, but do not fool yourself, boy. You are no longer one of us." Tariq chuckled under his breath. "No longer one of us?" "Good." That meant they feared him, and fear was a useful thing. That night, Obasi stood on the palace balcony, looking out over his kingdom. The city lights flickered below, a reminder of the people who depended on him. And yet, his thoughts were elsewhere. His mind was back in the throne room. Back to him. Tariq was here. Tariq was here. After all these years, after all the suffering, after all the betrayal, he was back. And worse, he had the nerve to stand before Obasi as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't left him. Obasi gripped the stone railing. It was frustrating, it was maddening, and yet... The thought of Tariq in the same palace again made something inside him stir. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. No, he would not allow himself to be distracted. Tariq sat in one of the palace courtyards, legs stretched out, watching the flickering lanterns dance in the evening air. The palace hadn't changed, the same marble floors, the same lush gardens. It was all so painfully familiar. But he had changed. He was no longer the boy who had whispered promises in the dark, no longer the fool who had believed love could survive in a place like this. A servant approached, setting down a goblet of wine. Tariq smirked, swirling the drink before taking a sip. Then, "I didn't send for wine." He turned his head, just as Obasi stepped into the courtyard. The king was still dressed in his royal attire, though the outer robe had been removed. Tariq scoffed. "Are you keeping tabs on my drinking habits, Your Majesty?" Obasi stepped closer, gaze unreadable. "That bottle is from my private collection." Tariq raised an eyebrow. "Ah, well then, it's good to know the palace still has fine taste." Obasi sat across from him, pouring himself a glass without breaking eye contact. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, "Why did you come back?" Obasi's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. Tariq leaned back. "You already know why." "Say it." Tariq exhaled, tapping a finger against the goblet. "Because this kingdom is falling apart." Obasi's jaw tightened. "And you think you can fix it?" Tariq tilted his head slightly, studying him. "I think we can." Obasi stilled. For a second, just a second, his expression softened. But then just as quickly, it was gone. "I don't trust you." Tariq smirked. "That's wise." The night air was thick with something unsaid. The weight of history between them pressed against their chests, but neither dared to acknowledge it. Instead, they drank in silence, the way they used to, the way they never would again. Tariq left the courtyard an hour later, the taste of wine still lingering on his lips. He wasn't drunk, but he felt something heavier than alcohol settling in his chest. He knew what this was. Memories, regret, things he had spent years trying to bury. But before he could think too much, a figure stepped out from the shadows. "You should leave while you still can." Tariq's hand hovered near the dagger at his belt, but when he turned, he saw it was only Elder Bahati. The old man's face was cold, his eyes sharp with warning. Tariq smirked. "Afraid I might become too comfortable?" Bahati took a step closer. "The council does not want you here. The king may have let you in, but make no mistake, you are not welcome." Tariq met his gaze unbothered. "That sounds like a threat, Elder." "It's a warning." Bahati's voice was low. "You don't belong in this palace anymore." Tariq chuckled, shaking his head. "And yet here I am." Bahati's expression darkened. "For now." Then without another word, he turned and disappeared down the hall. Tariq exhaled slowly. The games had begun. That night, Obasi couldn't sleep. He had stripped down to a simple tunic, his crown resting on a nearby table. Yet his mind refused to rest. Tariq was back. Tariq was here, the one person he had tried to forget. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, memories creeping in like unwelcome guests. He remembered the way Tariq used to laugh, carefree, reckless. He remembered the fire in his eyes, the way he had challenged him, made him question everything. Obasi closed his eyes. He should have hated him. He needed to hate him. But damn it all. His hands clenched into fists. This was going to be a long night. The next morning, Tariq stood before the council, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. The elders sat in a semicircle, their robes heavy with authority. Obasi sat at the head, his gaze locked onto Tariq like a blade pressed to his throat. Elder Bahati spoke first. "You claim to want to help the kingdom. Tell us, what does a traitor know about loyalty?" Tariq smirked. "That's funny. I was going to ask the same about a council that allowed the kingdom to rot while I was gone." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few elders exchanged glances. Obasi leaned forward. "Tariq." His voice was smooth, controlled, but Tariq could hear the warning beneath it. Tariq held his gaze. "I propose a new council, a mix of voices, nobles, warriors, and the people themselves." Elder Bahati scoffed. "Ridiculous. The king already has a council." Tariq turned to Obasi. "Yes, a council that serves itself." Silence. Obasi's jaw tightened. He hated that Tariq could still get under his skin. "Your words are bold," Obasi finally said. "But if you challenge the council, you challenge me." Tariq tilted his head, stepping closer. "Is that what you think?" His voice dropped lower, almost teasing. "That this is about you?" Obasi's pulse jumped. He could feel the air shift. The weight of Tariq's presence was suffocating. For a moment, just a moment, everything else in the room faded. Then, Obasi exhaled, slow and controlled. "I will consider your proposal." Elder Bahati's eyes darkened, but Tariq only smiled. "Good," Tariq murmured, before turning on his heel and walking away. Obasi watched him go, his grip tightening around the arms of his chair. He had won this round, but Tariq had never played fair. Obasi found Tariq in the gardens later that night. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, the lanterns casting golden light over the stone paths. Tariq stood near a fountain, rolling up the sleeves of his tunic as if he had no care in the world. Obasi clenched his jaw. "You don't know when to stop." Tariq turned, a slow smirk curving his lips. "Oh, and what exactly am I supposed to stop doing?" Obasi strode forward. "You challenged me in front of my council." Tariq took a step closer, voice lower now. "And what? It bothered you?" Obasi inhaled sharply. Tariq was too close. The scent of wine and something distinctly him wrapped around Obasi like a noose. He should have stepped back, but he didn't. Tariq tilted his head, watching him. "I forgot how much you love control." Obasi's eyes darkened. "And I forgot how much you love chaos." Tariq's lips twitched. "Ah, so we haven't changed much then." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. And then, Obasi's hand shot out, fingers wrapping around Tariq's wrist. The touch burned. Tariq's smirk faltered, just slightly. Obasi could feel the rapid pulse beneath his fingers. Or was that his own heartbeat? "You don't belong here," Obasi murmured, voice softer now. Tariq's gaze flickered to his lips, then back to his eyes. "And yet here I am." The moment stretched, charged, electric. Then Obasi let go. The tension snapped, but the fire didn't fade. Tariq exhaled, stepping back, his smirk returning like a shield. "Careful, Your Majesty. You might start making people talk." He turned and walked away, leaving Obasi standing in the shadows, fists clenched. Damn him. Damn him for coming back. Damn him for still making him feel like this. Obasi didn't sleep. Again. Tariq's words replayed in his head. The feel of his wrist beneath his grip. The way his breath had hitched. So small, so quick. But Obasi had noticed. He pressed his hands to his face, exhaling slowly. He needed to be careful. He could not afford weakness. His people needed strength. His council needed obedience. And he needed to stay far, far away from Tariq. But what if he didn't? What if all he wanted was the one thing he was finally ready to fight for? Thanks for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share, and to subscribe to the channel for more videos. Also, comment your thoughts about this video. I'd really love to hear from you. See you in the next one.